So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we are going to be talking about, of course, a number of different issues, but حفظ المسلم من الشبهات. Last time we talked about in details, of course, the اتباع الهوى, following the one's desires, and we went in details. And what we are really trying to understand, what acts as an obstacle to faith, but we're trying to get the lens of Hadith, perhaps to help us understand those areas. And we try to integrate along with the ahadith, integrate the ayat that relate to it, integrate the scholars, the al-Sahaba, and what they were also letting us learn in terms of understanding what is necessary to protect ourselves from the different obstacles to faith, whether, and we were going into al-ghulu, extremism. We talked about that in detail. We talked about ittiba' al-hawa. We talked about following the whims and desires. We are right now speaking about shubuhat. So hopefully we can talk about shubuhat, shahawat, and perhaps go within, I guess, these areas to help us understand how we can face these obstacles and definitely grow and continue to maintain our deen. So when we're talking about حفظ المسلم من الشبهات, preserving oneself from the misconceptions. What are we talking about when we're speaking about the different areas? So we're speaking about either an obstacle to faith, we're talking about a shubha or a shahwa. What's the difference between shubha and shahwa? So shubha actually comes from the root shabaha. When we say shabaha, we're talking about similarities, we're talking about similarities, okay? We're also talking about things that can seem, I guess, murky, that you can't really see these things and how they're different. In other words, the borders, they're all of a sudden, I guess, mixed with the things that surround it. So here we go. We're talking about borders mixed with the things that surround it. And then you start confusing the borders that surround it. Okay. And that's the key thing. So when you're talking about a shubha, you're talking about a line where you cannot distinguish this from that, right from wrong. You can't distinguish truth from falsehood. And it becomes like it's one area, it becomes all a gray area. And that's where that shubha comes in. You're not capable of distinguishing this fine line, this border. Why does why and how do these borders get confused? So when you're talking about a shubha, yes, it is murky, it is dark, it is similar of similar areas. You're not capable of distinguishing the borders. You're not capable of telling things apart. And then you're basically living a shubha. And with this shubha, it can actually overcome the person's brain. It can sometimes be just this area where you're really not capable of telling those areas apart. And your brain, it wants to discuss those shubha. And of course, as a human being, you cannot live feeling that you have anything confused. So that's an area of shubha. The area of shubha needs to definitely go through a number of different things in order to help you remove such confusion. That's the key word. So when we're speaking about shubha, we're also talking about confusions, confusing everything around us. Now, shahwa, on the other hand, is different because the shahwa is relating to desire. It's relating to desire. And when it comes to desire, it's what a person wants on the inside that basically is just making them feel entertained, just making them feel good, some good feeling on the inside. Dopamine, those different things that you might actually see, whether it's something that people are something that people would probably entertain themselves with. It could be shahwa, perhaps something in a stimulant to the body, different types of stimulants. You list the different types of stimulants. And of course, one person could be attracted to a stimuli more than another person attracted to that same stimuli. We're talked about shahwat. We're going to talk about that in more details. But right now, our focus is on a shubha. Now, we're not necessarily talking about shubuhat are actually different kinds, but we're not talking about one particular shubha. We're just talking about the different misconceptions, the different confusions out there, and what those look like. Now, some shubuhat, you're talking about different types of misconceptions. Some misconceptions can be related to aqidah. Some misconceptions, believe it or not, can be related to behavior as well. How is a misconception related to behavior? Is that even possible? We're going to talk about that in detail. The shubuhat, the misconceptions that are related to aqidah, they would have their areas. So it could be that a person might say, well, explain to me, I'm hearing in the media that Islam is a religion of terror. How is Islam not a religion of terror? So then I would basically have to lay out what terrorism means. This is really important. Whenever you would have a misconception, you first have to do what is considered like a tahrir al-lafz. You have to first scrutinize the meaning itself, the etymology, where it comes from, where that idea comes from, what's the political statement, what is the political influence out there, what are the philosophical influences out there that's making this definition be defined in that way. This is extremely important, whether we're speaking about, for example, something political or something social or something probably related to the deen. You always have to scrutinize the common knowledge that we live in during that time. This is basically epistemology. Our definition of marriage, our definition of adult, minor. Who defines what's an adult? What's a minor? Who defines what's right? Ethics. Who defines ethics? What defines ethics? Who defines right, wrong? Who defines violence? Who defines human? Who defines male, female, etc.? All of that is necessary before you would get into any misconception. Before you would get into any misconception, don't just scrutinize Islam. A lot of those that want to attack Islam, they just want you to just take this angle and consider without you realizing, consider that as if we agree on the Western definition that this is the starting point, that this is the paradigm, and therefore since they would consider that, yes, we're going to agree that the Western definition, let's say, of what makes an adult, what makes a minor, what makes ethics, what makes freedom, what defines terror, what defines religion, what defines, the list goes on and on. They would basically want you to come from that standpoint and consider that the Western definition is basically the starting point and not Islam. And that Islam would basically be the one, let's say, behind bars and is the suspect. This is extremely important to keep in mind. But what a Muslim does and what the Quran wants to do is say that no, flip and don't accept to be behind the bars. You have to learn how to recognize not to be put behind bars and then let the other person lay out all the misconceptions at you, and then you become in the defense mode, and rather than saying, well, now I want you to think about yourself. Can you tell me where your ideas came from? Can you tell me how you got to defining freedom in that way? Where is that? Who's the pioneer? Who's the the godfather of such an idea, whether it's postmodernism, feminism, whatever it is, who's the person, and why should we succumb, and why should we submit to that person and submit to that definition, or submit to that idea, or submit to that philosophy? Why should we? So Islam tells us that in order to face the misconceptions, you first have to start by recognizing that your foundation don't be put behind bars. Get out of that bar, get out of that cage, and go up and start with the foundation of La ilaha illallah. That's the start. In other words, it starts by telling you, you gotta liberate yourself. This is important. Liberate yourself from any enforcement that, or even ideas that are forced upon you or indoctrinated in you without you realizing. Islam tells you, before you discuss anything, I want you to liberate yourself from the thoughts that have already manipulated you to believing that no, Islam is the one that's right there behind bars. Islam is telling you, liberate yourself, or if you cannot liberate yourself, then you cannot liberate your mind. If you don't stand up with the main place in position that you're standing in, which is Allahu Akbar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically the starting point. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that is beyond. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically the one to define truth, to define the purpose that preceded your existence, is to define, of course, people's rights, the borders, and those areas are key to recognize. Can human beings fall in wrongdoings? Absolutely. Now, that's why some people you would see fall in these misconceptions, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described some people as minhum man ya'budu Allah ala harf. Some people are at the edge. They're not on in the core of the religion. They're on the edge. They would hear a scandal about some kind of a popular figure. Oh, and then they would say, well, yeah, look, I don't want to believe in this religion anymore. Look at what some of its figures are doing. This is a person on the edge. This person doesn't resemble Islam. This is a human being just like you and I. They can fall in sin. They can get into a misconception. Our religion is not based on that person. That person is not a prophet. He's not a prophet. So some people, يَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ عَلَى حَرْفٍ. Any change. قال ولا خير في ود امرئ متقلبا إذا الريح مالت مال حيث تميل. It is not befit for a man, for a woman, whenever the wind might blow, perhaps a certain misconception, they would take that misconception, and instead of going beyond and looking at scrutinizing everything, subhanAllah, when you look at animals, a little off, you would see the eagles. They would be right at the top of trees. They don't go down. They go way at the top. And when you look at eagles, they basically they don't fly too often, but they would glide and glide and glide. And eagles are really a sign of power, a symbol of power. And when you look at these certain animals, the same thing when you're talking about lions. You look at lions, you look at these certain animals, the most powerful animals are not the ones that move too much. They would consider their movement, and before they put an energy or any effort in anything, they would scrutinize it and study it first, and before making the leap. And when they make the leap, they make it to win. They make the move to win, but they would watch it closely. for a Muslim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching us that for a Muslim, before they would make any move, they would take the moment to look at things and study it closely, because the Muslim is supposed to be acting based on the light and not the darkness and not a person's biases. They would let the light guide them. The light of what? The light of al-Wahy. The light of al-Wahy. So the different misconceptions out there, you would see there are certain misconceptions in Aqeedah, but the misconceptions in Aqeedah usually come because the person had actually fallen in certain misconceptions, or let me say, those borders in their behavior, in their environment, in, of course, the area, the behavior brings about a certain idea. The certain ideas bring about these confused visions, and then this confusion becomes that everything to them is similar, and they're confusing all those borders. So what you end up with, seeing things that are not aware of where this truth begins and where it ends, and where does the fine line really exist. And there's no way that you'll be capable of distinguishing the borders if you don't have ilm. Ilm is key to being able to distinguish the borders. But guess what? Ilm is key, but it's not the only thing. Sometimes certain behaviors can bring in confusions. Why? Because our brain is connected with the things that surround us. Our behavior also influences our brain. It affects our brain. It has its impact on our brain. And without us realizing, this will be something that can definitely cause some confusion in our brain, and we're then confusing the different borders. So this is key to understanding, well, what can, I'm not here going to discuss the misconceptions that are out there. Probably terror, is Islam a terrorist religion? Is Sharia a religion of terror, or is Sharia a religion that is inhumane? Or is the Prophet ﷺ, is he accused of this and this? All these different things that they might accuse the Prophet ﷺ or accuse Islam of, and etc. That's not the misconceptions that I'm here going to be researching, okay? Because that's more of aqeedah. Okay, that's more of aqeedah, but I'm here wanting to discuss the behaviors that can trigger certain misconceptions, or let me say, certain psychology of shubuhat. That's what I want to call it, the psychology of shubuhat. And this is important because when we're speaking about the psychology of shubuhat, not always, many times we could see a person coming forward and they're having a misconception, and the person would think that, oh, they're just confused about a shubha. We need someone to refute this shubha. And you'll later discover that not every single person that comes forward with a shubha is really wanting the science of it. So it's not always the science behind refuting such a misconception and thinking, well, let me study the resources. Let me help you where you confuse this matter, this hadith al-Sahih, this hadith al-Da'if. You're probably getting into that area. But many times you would see people coming in with a misconception, not because the science of it, as much as it is the psychology of it. It's a psychology of feeling defeated, the psychology of lacking confidence. And this is the shubha that I want to discuss, because the Quran did, and you could see that Islam didn't disregard this as being key to discussing the bigger shubuhat. The Quran considered both are important. So Quran definitely refuted those shubuhat that regard, for example, when the Prophet ﷺ was accused of being a magician, when the Prophet ﷺ was accused of being a lunatic, when the Prophet ﷺ was accused of getting some information from some priest out there, etc. The Quran did discuss and refute these misconceptions or refute such allegations. But at the same time, the Quran did talk about the psychology of shubuhat, and the psychology of shubuhat and the confusions and what actually affects these people. For those types of misconceptions, we've got right now, mashallah, pioneers, and I would say great people out there, to name some that are doing a good job in refuting some misconceptions, and perhaps to name some, I would say right now we've got that are doing a good job, at least for the younger generation. I would say Iera is doing a really good job, IERA, I believe that's how you spell it, along with there's Muhammad Hijab, there's Ali Dawah, there's Hamza Tsoris as well. You've got right now there's Sapiens as well. They're also doing a good job with Hamza Tsoris and many others. You also have Fadl Sulaiman. I'm talking about the ones that speak in English. Abdullah Al-Ajari also joined and also doing a good job right there. From Al Maghrib Institute, I would say they're doing an excellent job in trying to help at least in refuting some of those misconceptions. Yaqeen Institute, good job, also doing a good job. Yes, and you will see, I want to say one thing, you will see some people might be attacking, let's say maybe an article, maybe you don't agree with an article, or perhaps let's say Yaqeen Institute wrote an article, maybe not necessarily accurate, maybe that doesn't mean that we would demolish the whole institution. Reach out, present something better. The whole field is open. Rather than attack everything that they are doing, go ahead, present an alternative instead of demolishing the whole institute and all the good things that it's presenting. Everybody makes mistakes. You have something better to say it. But don't be a person, whenever someone's building something, you're just there to demolish. Go ahead and build something else. If you feel that they're not doing enough, go ahead and do something. Go ahead and do something. So Yaqeen Institute doing a good job. Like I mentioned, we've got right now some of the books translated for a recent book that was published, going to be published, inshallah, by Sapiens as well, by Sami Amiri, about the Prophet ﷺ. So you do have a number of different areas that are right now, I would say, a number of different areas that are right now, I would say, doing an outstanding job online, of course, writing articles, writing books, trying to present, I guess, the different ways to help bring about the misconceptions into scrutiny. This is extremely important, into scrutiny. So that's not what I want to discuss. I'm not here to discuss those misconceptions in Aqidah. Here I'm talking about the psychology of misconceptions and, of course, how to maintain one's iman during the time of misconceptions. That's what we're here trying to discuss. You want to keep in mind, let's look into some of the ayat and let's look into some of the hadith in order to scrutinize that piece of it, the psychology of shubuhat. Let's see. The first ayah that I wanted to mention, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا لِكُلِّ نَبِيٍّ عَدُوًّا شَيَاطِينَ الْإِنسِ والجن يوحي بعضهم إلى بعض زخرف القول غرورا ولو شاء ربك ما فعلوه فذرهم وما يفترون ولتصغى إليه أفئدة الذين لا يؤمنون بالآخرة وليرضوه وليقترفوا ما هم مقترفون. This is a key, especially during our times. This is a key ayah. What is it saying? Let's see in English, and thus we have made for every prophet an enemy, devils from mankind and jinn, who inspired to one another decorated speech and delusion. And if your Lord had willed, they would not have done it. So leave them in what they invent, and let the hearts of those who do not believe in the hereafter incline towards it. And let them be content with it, and let them commit what they're committing. Well, I want to actually go further. I would say the translation is a little rather surface. Let's go look further into the ayah and really try to understand where this is taking us. كذلك جعلنا لكل نبي. Whenever you would see كذلك, that's in order to tell you that there's a paradigm. What is a paradigm? It's a pattern. In other words, when you look at this, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, that this isn't just during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but this is a pattern, this is a system, this is the agenda that throughout history, whether it's the history that had passed or the times to come, this is the paradigm that is used always. What is that? You got, not only is it the system, an agenda used against the prophets, but it's also used against the Salihin. What is it? Adu. You would have this enemy. You would have this person these groups of people that would definitely work in agendas, that would work in teams in order basically to somehow attack, somehow gain publicity, somehow certainly try to use different methods in order to let people become let's say, feeling threatened. That's the number one thing. Just like what Fir'aun had done to the people of Bani Israel and to the masses within Egypt. He was basically telling this man is a threat. This man, and these people, be careful with this one. These people usually come in an image of faith. What does that mean? You want to remember that Fir'aun, when he presented himself, he didn't present himself as a person that is lacking faith, but he presented himself as God, the founder of faith. And then he started using a rhetoric of faith, and he would say, إِنِّي أَخَافُ أَن يُبَدِّلَ دِينَكُمْ أَوْ أَن يُظْهِرَ فِي الْأَرْضِ الْفَسَادِ. I fear that he will change your commitment to your religion, your commitment to your principle, the commitment of what founded the civilization. أَوْ أَن يُظْهِرَ فِي الْأَرْضِ الْفَسَادِ. And I fear that he might spread al-fasad, corruption on earth. Now he's presenting himself, that is Fir'aun, like he is a person of social justice, like he's a person of commitment, like he's a person of faith. And usually the people that will bring about the misconceptions, they'll bring themselves in an image as if they are trying to bring about justice, social justice. They're trying to bring about peace in the society. They're trying to bring about freedom. They're trying to bring about these different ways for people to be happy about their life, to make them basically enjoy and recognize one another. Inclusivity, all these different terminologies is definitely going to be coming at you. So the first thing they would start is making these Salihin appear as if they are the terrorists, as if they were the corruptors, as if they were the ones that are a danger to the society, and therefore it would be what is called an ad hominem. It would be attacking the person and not refuting whatever is being presented. It's basically attacking the person by somehow making this person appear as not even being human enough, and therefore when we trial them, we won't trial them and we will not deal with them like they are human, because we had already stripped them away from their humanity. So Muhammad ﷺ is presented like he's a lunatic, like he's nothing but an evil person, a person of magic, a person that is coming to bring corruption and trying to separate the father from the children and the family, and therefore making the society lose their confidence, not in what ideas are out there, but it usually comes to attack the person, attack the people, and present them like they're figures of disbelief, like they're figures of corruption, and so forth. Now, that's the same presentation that during our modern times, it's usually the same agenda. You've got shayateen al-ins, you've got certain people, they're human beings, but their mindset is nothing but a mindset of a shaitan. Diabolical mindset. And what do? And even al-jinn would collaborate with them, and they would be yuhi ba'duhum ila ba'd. They would give inspirations. How did they translate it? Inspire. There would, good job. Yuhi ba'duhum ila ba'd zukhruf al-qawl. What is that? They would give each other certain inspirations. Who would give who? Al-jinn and the humans. They would collaborate with one another in order to basically inspire one another to create what? Zukhruf al-qawl. What is Zukhruf al-qawl? Zukhruf al-qawl, definitely, translated it here, decorated speech, but it's a narrative. It would become in a form of a decorated or an eloquent speech, that it comes in as a narrative that sounds very attractive, that sounds very inspiring, that sounds very, humane. It's coming in to make you feel happy. It's coming in, and that's the decorated speech. So you're seeing during our times, for example, trying to replace religious institutions by bringing in another form of, let's say, these what are called motivational speeches and all of that, by putting in these new forms of motivational speeches. And that's why you would see that they're right now, I guess, bringing in these therapists, that you have to have a therapist, that you have to have a psychologist, that you have to have this. It's trying to replace religion with something that is definitely coming in from an atheist standpoint and trying to bring in an alternative. I'm not saying don't go to therapists. I'm not saying don't go to psychologists, but I will say that there is an agenda to replace deism, to replace religion, to replace the role of religion and the role of God with new gurus. They're basically these new gurus or new shuyukh or whatever you want to call it, and that they would be basically the therapists, and the therapists would come in. They were trained to not judge your religion. They were trained that, yes, if you feel good about it, then you should be appreciated. As long as you're happy with it, then it's okay. As long as it feels good, it's fine. People should appreciate it. People should be inclusive to you. People should, and then of course, if you're still feeling guilty, we'll give you antidepressants. Well, you're still feeling guilty. Well, it's their fault. Don't feel guilty about it. They're just not being inclusive enough, and the list goes on and on. So what do we got? Zukhruf al-qawl. Zukhruf al-qawl during our times is special, was actually probably the most time ever to come in terms of having different fields of philosophy, different fields of media, different fields of marketing, propaganda, the list goes on, psychology, and it's presented in a way that it is scientific. It is presented in a way that it is intellect. that it is what we know of what studies are telling us. What does it do? It basically presents it as zukhruf al-qawl. It is nothing but a manipulation, but they present it in a way that is rhetorical, manipulating, and it's manipulating the masses to make them think of the narrative rather than think of the logic that is backing up that statement. Is that rational? Is that logical? Is that supporting what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created in this world? And that's why they would act in ghurur. What is al-ghurur? Those people that are deviant, their way to somehow do the psychology of shubha is to act in ghurur. What is ghurur? Al-ghurur is arrogance. And you would see that on campus often. They would come in trying to empty you from your confidence. Emptying you from your confidence. So what they would do, corner you with so many questions that you probably are not given enough time to answer. And then with al-ghurur, they would come in and speak with such a pride. And that's why they even called, for example, the LGBT movement as a pride movement. It's all about feeding ghurur, all about feeding arrogance. And they would come forward with that mentality that, hey, be confident. You're the one that's basically supposed to be strong. And they would come with such a, and I'll tell you, it's very manipulating. And the person that lacks this confidence in their religion, they'll feel all of a sudden ashamed of themselves. They'll feel emptied of their confidence. They'll feel small because these people are presenting themselves like they are the foundation, the center of truth, the center of civilization, the center of what it means to be liberated, what it means to be free, what it means to be strong, what it means to be intellectual, what it means to be educated, what it means to be everything that contains basically of what they had inspired themselves with. وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ مَا فَعَلُوا. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you He could have prevented them and stopped them from what they are doing. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala فَذَرْهُمْ وَمَا يَفْتَرُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically given them and given the free will, let people do, and one day Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold them accountable. So what am I supposed to do in that situation? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَذَرْهُمْ. Should I not face them? If you have the capacity to face, to refute the claims that they had presented, well, then do so. If such a psychology is too strong for you, well, then in that situation, فَذَرْهُمْ. You got to ostracize yourself from them. There are certain groups you cannot necessarily just put yourself amongst them and say, well, I'm going to do my part of da'wah. If it's too much for you, then in that situation, فَذَرْهُمْ, you have to isolate yourself from them, because these people, they're just so engaged in such arrogance that sometimes you have to recognize with your psychology as a Muslim, sometimes you have to recognize which areas should I completely isolate myself from, and which area, and when should I stand right there and actually fight with my words, or sometimes even fight physically. Certainly, if I'm being attacked right there, don't just wait till you get completely smashed. Sometimes you have to defend yourself and actually stand and defend yourself and not wait and think that I'm supposed to be peaceful. Not necessarily. Sometimes you have to stand up and actually defend the truth. That's why we've got jihad of the nafs as well. So right there, right now, at least when you see zukhruf al-qawl, you also have to, in opposition to all of this, you also have to do your job You have to do your job in creating a machine that is similar to their machine. They've got their machine of propaganda. Well, you have to do your machine in bringing about that awareness about Islam. They've got their machine on college campuses. You create your group in bringing about awareness, whether it's tabling, whether it's perhaps talking one-to-one, or perhaps going into the different lecture classrooms and so forth. Then you would have to do, hey, they're doing their job. You have to do and present your job as well. They're basically having these parties. Make your Islamic party. This is key. This is important to create an opposition to their mass machine that's inspiring one another into falsehood and into the wrong rhetoric. You would have to present the right rhetoric. And if you are not capable of doing so, perhaps you don't have the money to do so. Perhaps you don't have the system supporting you to do so. Then in that situation, if you're not capable of doing this, you have to work to get yourself stronger. At least start with yourself. First, isolate yourself from all of this arrogance. That's the first thing. 2, وَلِتَصْغَى إِلَيْهِ أَفْئِدَةُ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْآخِرَةِ. You're going to be recognizing that there's certain people that this area of زخرف القول will seem very attractive to them. Who are these people? These people are the ones that are focused on dunya. أفئدة الذين لا يؤمنون بالآخرة. What is الأفئدة? الأفئدة is the heart. What is the heart containing of? Well, when we're speaking about the heart, we're usually talking about desires. So what you would see these people actually using different things to attract the people of dunya. Usually things like drugs, things like zina, things like music, things like ikhtilat and intermingling men and women. Why? Because this is basically something that is feeding their desires. So the areas that feed the desires are basically the areas that would be attracting those that would want to live in such arrogance. So in other words, anyways, as a Muslim, let's reread and let's look into the back end of what this is saying. For the mu'mineen, the story is very different. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, who's the one, وَلِتَصْغَى, who's the one that's going to be listening to all of this? Who's going to be listening to this narrative? It's basically going to be those people that their hearts were just so connected and so hooked on entertainment. Those are the ones that you're going to see their hearts attracted to this. In other words, when you're looking at most misconceptions are not coming from the stance so what you will find is that most misconceptions and most people are actually, I would say, a result of this area of, let's say, the desires area, the shahawat area is what actually led them to falling into the shubuhat. This is key. Now, that's the same thing. For the mu'mineen, if you want to continue with your iman, you have to guard your shahawat. You see that? Guarding your shahawat is key to guarding you from the shubuhat. Why? Because the shahawat, they basically think of it as making kind of like a like a, what is the word that I could use? Uh, like a labeling, and more like it's a file that you would surround your mind with, because your mind is not thinking with clarity when it's now letting its shahawat think on its behalf. Now the mind itself is so sealed. Here's the word. It's so sealed through shahawat that it's not even thinking with clarity. So Islam tells you that in wattaqullah a'lamkumullah. Have taqwa and you'll get the ilm. You see that one? So in other words, to bring about the clarity to your mind and be able to see al-haq as haq and al-batil is batil, to see the truth as truth and batil as batil, and evil and wronghood as wronghood, it's key to make sure that you're letting your vision see through the vision of clarity in mind and not the shahawat leading your vision. So what happened is that these people, they became an easy target because they were basically pacified through their dunya from having their mind and their heart. Keep in mind, the mind is different than the heart, because the heart is more related to what you do. The mind is a tool to help you navigate the different ideas. But the heart, it basically goes into a deeper scrutiny, a deeper understanding. Okay? And that's why when you look at the word afida that was used, it was telling us right there that it's a key thing. What really processed the idea? It was the fu'ad and not the aql. What influenced the fu'ad? What influenced the heart? It was really the behavior that they were engaging in. What behavior was that? It was the behavior, لا يؤمنون بالآخرة. It was the behavior that was motivated by faith in this dunya and not the faith in al-akhirah. What does that even mean? So if a person is focused on al-akhirah, you're going to see that they're really focused on presenting the things that they will cultivate in the akhirah. They're really looking for principle and not for materialistic things. They're not focused on getting the achievement and the success in this life, but they're focused on getting the success and achievement in the hereafter. وَلْيَرْضَوْا. What happens? Well, in the beginning, the heart was the one that was listening. He didn't say ears were listening to this, because the ears are just like the brain. They're the tool to basically get the information in. That's basically it. But the real process happens in the heart. He didn't say وَلِتَصْغَى آذَانُهُم. No, he said وَلِتَصْغَى إِلَيْهِ أَفْئِدَةٌ. إِلَيْهِ أَفْئِدَةُ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. What happened? The ear is a tool. The eye is a tool. The brain is a tool. The area to cook all of this is the heart. To process all of this is the heart. And you want to keep that in mind, because the same thing, your behavior is basically your ears, what you're listening to, what you're looking at. You might think of it as, oh, it shouldn't affect my deen. Actually, it will be the tool that later gets cooked within the person's heart. So maintaining your deen, let's say, from what you're looking at, what you're listening to, the society, the environment that you're putting yourself in, all of that is going to be cooked in your heart without you realizing. What's going to happen? It's going to process in your heart, and then وَلْيَرْضَوْا, and they'll be so content of it. Why? Because anyways, they're living al-ghurur. Anyways, they're living such ghurur, they're living such arrogance that they are just so content, they're just so happy about it. They're just feeling at peace with it, even though they're living the confusion. وَلْيَقْتَرِفُوا مَا هُمْ مُخْتَرِفُونَ. But that's not going to end there. It's going to end into engaging in so many different actions that later on it's going to bring about corruption within the society. In other words, they're really going to harvest what they had basically engaged in within that inspiration. It's going to be like a rolling snowball, one after the other. Now that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching us that the most important thing is to make the dua. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. ربنا, oh Lord, don't deviate our hearts. I want you to look at this one. Don't deviate our hearts. Didn't say our mind. It said don't deviate our hearts. When? بعد إذ هديتنا. After you had guided us. In other words, what? I want you to compare that with the ayah that we started out with. Why did it focus on the heart? Because that's where your behaviors, the different behaviors, are going to process in. It's going to get processed in the heart. بعد إذ هديتنا. After you had guided our hearts, guided our mind, وهب لنا, and give us rahmah. Wait a minute. Why rahmah? Why rahmah? Because remember these people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلْيَقْتَرِفُوا مَا هُمْ مُقْتَرِفُونَ. Let them engage in what they want to engage in. وَالْإِقْتِرَاف is to do something. It's to commit something. So what does that mean? That means this is not telling them, this is not telling them, do whatever you want, we're okay with it. No, this is a tahdeed. This right there is basically a threat and telling them, it's kind of like the mother telling her son. It's like, yeah, show me what you can do. I'll see what you're going to do about it. The mother might tell her son that. That's not the mother telling her son, show me what you could do, or let me see what you're going to do about it. Definitely, she's telling him, I'm going to see what you're going to do, and you're going to see what I'm going to do in retrospect to all of this. And of course, that's a threat right there. That's a threat right there. And that's the same thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them, well, you're going to say the threat coming at you. You're going to say, وَمَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ. You're going to see whoever does anything wrong, the yujza bihi, the punishment is going to be from the same jins, from the same type of wrong behavior. So what are we looking at right there? At the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that وَلْيَقْتَرِفُوا مَا هُمْ مُخْتَرِفُونَ. Right here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَهَبْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً, and give us the mercy. What is mercy, and what does that have to do with anything? Well, that's in order to tell us that what لا تزغ قلوبنا, what is الزيغ? الزيغ, let's say, deviate. Okay, that's a fair translation. But الزيغ is to get off the track, even if we're speaking about a small amount. So what does that look like? Maybe I could draw that. So if we're talking about, you've got a line, and this is this line, but a zayg would be just a small off track. This is a zayg. Because a zayg in the beginning, it seems very close to this line of access. But it isn't until long after that you would see that this line became farther than the actual axis. In the beginning, you couldn't tell the difference. Now, the person that's standing here, they're not capable of seeing the difference, and they don't even recognize how they started out. They started out in the beginning. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us that Izzayq could start and usually starts with just a small off track that you would not be capable of distinguishing that you really got off track. That's why the Prophet ﷺ was warning the Sahaba and was telling them, that whoever lives long enough, you will see a huge change, a huge difference compared to what we're presenting. That is what the Prophet ﷺ had come with and what people had reinterpreted, misinterpreted, innovated within the religion. Now, very often, and I would see it even amongst those that would present themselves as scholars many times, especially in the West, it would come in, and many times we would see people coming forth and telling us, well, this is a modern way of presenting the religion. When what we may not realize is that a dakhan, what is it, dakhan? The Prophet ﷺ had warned us about dakhan. What is it, dakhan? Dakhan comes from the root dakhana. What is dakhana? The root dakhana simply is smoke. But that's not talking to a smoke. This is actually speaking about it becomes so blurry for people to see because of the many interferences out there, many ideas that would be coming in, and it would be presented like it's a modern way of saying things. And without us realizing that no, it's not necessarily a modern way of saying things, but there was a great influence that resulted in an interpretation that is far away from the interpretation that the scholars had done many, many, many years ago. And you would be accused if you were to bring about that interpretation that the scholars understood Islam in, you would be accused of being backwards, traditional. And then, without us realizing, this becomes too many, too traditional, that it becomes like it's a derogatory description. But what should be an area of concern is when we're seeing many right now coming in and presenting Islam in a rhetoric that it's not actually coming from the Islamic foundation. It's presented like it's a new way, when in reality, it's actually coming in with a whole package coming from probably liberalism, probably existentialism, postmodernism, the different philosophies that are probably right now considered as the new way of understanding human beings, the new way of being inclusive, the new way of getting political correctness. And then, without us realizing what happened, it was a zayg that happened. It was a zayg. Where did it come from? It came from zukhruf al-qawl. It came in with zukhruf al-qawl. It came in with all those narratives that were presented as if it was a new decorated, a new eloquent way, a new smart way of creating a newer version of how to be inclusive, how to do the political correctness without offending others, and the list goes on and on. So that word that we would make, the dua, ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا. Ya Allah, don't let our hearts get into that confusion, that murkiness, that deviation when it goes off track. Where? It's the hearts. It's what our heart cooked in terms of probably as a result of what is being said within the society that we're living in. What we're seeing from the media, what we're probably hearing at school, or what we're probably hearing within the community that we're living in. And the list goes on and on. And our brain, our hearing, our behavior probably engaged in a certain behavior. But our hearts, they cooked that whole tool of information. And then what it resulted in, it can result in a misguidance. So here, when you look at that ayah, رَبَّنَا لَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا بَعْدَ إِذْ هَدَيْتَنَا, Ya Allah, don't let our hearts get deviated after we had found guidance. In other words, if the person is not living in hidayah, their hearts will actually go off track. وَهَبْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً, and grant us rahmah. Why rahmah? What does that have to do with anything? Because remember the previous ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us, وَلْيَقْتَرِفُوا مَا هُمْ مُخْتَرِفُونَ. This is a tahdid, that they're basically, وَمَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ. If you do the wrong thing, it's basically going to come back to you. It's going to snap at you. There's no way that you could do something wrong and think that you can get away with it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, well, what actually comes with hidayah and what comes with guidance is really mercy, is really rahmah, that you would see on the inside and you would live on the outside. إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْوَهَّابِ. إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْوَهَّابِ. You are the one that is basically the one to grant all of this. Grant what? Well, إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْوَهَّابِ. You're the one that grants hidayah. You're the one that grants focus. You're the one that grants rahmah. So therefore, you're reaching out to al-Wahhab, because if you're on guidance, well, it's not because you were so smart to be on there only, but it's basically from rahmatillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He had given you guidance. It's from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and from the gratitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He had given you the rahmah to be protected from all the deviants out there. So how can we maintain that? There's no way that you can maintain your hidayah, or even the rahmah, unless وَإِن تَصْبِرُوا وَتَتَّقُوا لَا يَضُرُّكُمْ كَيْدُهُمْ شَيْئًا. وَإِن تَصْبِرُوا وَتَتَّقُوا لَا يَضُرُّكُمْ كَيْدُهُمْ شَيْئًا. I want you to look at this one. And if you remain patient and you remain conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then their plot will not harm you. Wait a minute. Why did it say وَإِن تَصْبِرُوا? What am I supposed to be patient on? Your patience involves when you would not let your whims desire, your emotions desire things for you. You would let truth and principle determine your behavior. So what is patience? For patience can be patience in doing what is right, doing what is obligatory. In other words, forcing yourself to, despite you probably not liking something, forcing yourself in doing what is obligatory. That's patience the first type. The patience from haram. There's patience to do what is obligatory, patience to stay away from haram. So you might have the desire to do something haram. And it's a strong desire. It's an urge. And guess what? These people that come with these urges, that many times they would be the ones to actually get into addiction. And this addiction basically takes them from one stage to another, from one stage of, let's say, the ability to go and probably get treatment, but then the stronger it becomes, the harder the treatment is going to be harder, and certainly probably the treatment is going to be requiring perhaps a complete isolation. I want you to keep this one in mind, that Islam was telling us that a lot of the different things that can be an area of addiction, Islam was telling us you gotta be careful from those areas, things that affect the brain. Islam even a sip of alcohol. Told you, because if you were to get addicted, it's going to be too strong for you to fight. I don't even want you to take not even one sip. Drugs, not even one sniff. Probably, the zina, not even one gaze. Don't even look into that area. Don't even engage with the people that are speaking about these things. Don't even be within those communities, because if you were to get involved in it, the addiction is probably going to be too strong for you to fight. So therefore, وَإِن تَصْبِرُوا, you need to be patient and not let your urge control you. So therefore, patience from doing what is haram, or even getting attracted, intimidated to get into that environment. الصبر, there's a second type. الصبر عن الحرام. Number 3, sabr could also mean sabr to grow in the different levels of your deen. Probably sabr and making sure that you are taking in the time to probably memorize, to probably study, to probably do what is right. It's probably, and you want to keep in mind that being Muslim, oh dear, being Muslim, as الدين تعال. So when we're speaking about growing from one level to another, it's important to keep in mind that from the level of Islam, definitely the amount of effort that you're going to put is way different than the amount of Iman. The amount of Iman is relating to the heart. The level of Islam is relating to the mind. The level of ihsan is relating to the spirit. Where did we get that from? Hadith Jibreel. So in the level of Islam, the things that you're supposed to be doing in the level of Islam, to be patient on that. Number 1, yes, you're going to be working out shahadat la ilaha illallah, maintaining at least your belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, belief in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, belief in the Quran. That's the level of Islam. And doing certain things. Salah, try to work on your foundation in salah. Try to work on your foundation in siyam. Try to work on your foundation in perhaps the different ibadat. We're talking about salah, siyam, zakah, and certainly hajj if you have the money to do so. Okay, so that's the level of Islam. That's the level that you want to focus, at least in the beginning, to maintain. That's the sabr for level of Islam. In the level of Iman, no, there's a higher level of sabr. The higher you go up, the more you need to invest in your area of patience. What is patience? Remember, patience in controlling your emotions, in controlling your desires, in living the principle, in embracing fully the principle. The stronger you embrace the principle of Islam, principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're going to see yourself growing up and going up in the levels, the stages of Islam, from the stage of Islam to the stage of Iman to later the stage of Ihsan. Now, in the stage of Iman, it requires something else. It requires that you would enforce more sunnah. You would stay away from makruh. You would probably maybe fast Mondays and Thursdays, maybe memorize more Quran, maybe do qiyam al-layl, maybe do perhaps more dhikr, probably get more classes. Maybe now you're trying to go up the stage from Islam to Iman. But if you're not capable of probably doing qiyam al-layl, you're probably not capable of engaging in dhikr. That actually means your level of Islam needs some enhancement. Your level of Iman, your certain actions, they probably are slipping here and there. That's why uh, it was mentioned شكوت إلى وكيع سوء حفظي فأرشدني إلى ترك المعاصي وأخبرني بأن العلم نور ونور الله لا يهدى لعاصي. So this Salih, it was said Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, but it's not actually Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, because Waki' was for another teacher, but that's a different story. Anyhow, so he complained to Waki'. Waki' is a sheikh. He said, I'm basically trying to learn, but I'm not capable of having the good memory to memorize all of this. And he said, فَأَرْشَدَنِي. So he guided me إِلَى تَرْكِ الْمَعَاصِي. He guided me to abstaining from sin. Why? أخبرني بأن العلم نور. He taught me that ilm is light. And the light can never be gifted to someone that is indulging in sin. They don't go together. They don't blend. There's no way that you're going to be capable of memorizing Quran if you're hooked on songs, on music, because your brain is going to be busy repeating perhaps those songs and that music, and then your brain is not going to be capable of doing that. There's no way that you're going to probably love some celebrity and at the same time love Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. There's no way. If your mind is so connected to the celebrity and you're just constantly just following the celebrity and trying to see how their life is like, though that means you're not following the وَمَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِلرَّجُلِ مِنْ قَلْبَيْنِ فِي جَوْفِهِ. No one has two hearts in their heart. You only have one heart. That's the area that's cooking and processing all of that. Then in that situation, what are you really doing in processing what your brain is thinking of and what your ears are listening to and what your words are saying and what your ears are listening to and what your behavior and your footsteps are going to? That's at the end going to be within your area of control. The more you control that, the more you will find حلاوة الإيمان يجدها في قلبه. The more they would find the beauty of faith that they would find in their hearts. And then to go from the level of al-Iman to the level of al-Ihsan, now that's a different job. That's a different level of focus, because in the level of al-Ihsan, the person, they could just see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala everywhere, not literally, but they would see the powers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they cannot even, not even a split of a second, forget about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're seeing the powers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala surrounding them in each and every single moment. They're just living hubbillah. They're living the love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then that takes us وَإِن تَصْبِرُوا وَتَتَّقُوا. That takes us to the other last and final kind of sabr, which is when you're inflicted with pain, probably the death of a child, probably disease, probably you lost all your wealth, probably who knows what might happen to you. The different calamities might be left and right taking you without you realizing. In that situation, to live the patience is to not let go of your principle. You recognize Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. You recognize that our return is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing is to take away my principle, because I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would only decree what is good for me, would only decree what is right. And I recognize that this life is temporary. I'm not going to live here eternally. It's the akhirah that matters. So for al-mu'min, they would process all of these things and they would live the principle. And that's why the ayah continues to say, well, you engage in a sabr. The pain is still there. The hardship to probably not get into that urge is probably hard, definitely. But by you controlling it, that's what is going to lead to taqwa. Living a sabr leads to taqwa. What a taqwa? But there's no way that you're going to live the taqwa if you don't engage in sabr. There's no way. There's absolutely no way that you can get into taqwa unless you invest in sabr. لا يضركم كيدهم شيئا. That in that situation, all the plots that they were doing, because they were right there, probably investing in their agendas, they were basically enemies of collaborating shayateen and jinn soldiers and armies in order to harm the mu'mineen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, لا يضركم كيدهم شيئا. Don't worry, their plot would not harm you. But is it possible that they can kill us? Certainly. But you as a believer, you recognize that the legacy that you carry in does not end with your death. The legacy doesn't continue. The legacy doesn't stop with a prophet's death. And we recognize that لا يضركم كيدهم. You recognize that you are a character within the story of Islam, not the only character. So you do your part, just like the prophets were doing their part, and the story of Islam and the story of the battle between al-haq and al-batil continue. And it continues, but then it continues until on Judgment Day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically tell us that that's where the true success, and you will see that their kaid was not going to be the one that is successful. So what to do? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا. And we had made from them leaders, يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا. They would guide. And what type of guidance? By the guidance of the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when did that happen? لَمَّا صَبَرُوا. When they were patient. There's no way. And this is why you would see the best of those leaders are the leaders that probably endured imprisonment, probably endured poverty. You would see that the most masculine and most successful men or women are the ones that actually lived and endured poverty, endured perhaps pain, endured perhaps abuse, endured so many different hardships. They become the most powerful. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us about a lot of those nations that were destructed and corrupted. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that they were always, the word utrifu fiha. That was living the luxury. Luxury brings in people that are very delicate. That's why mothers don't always make everything so easy for your children. Sometimes let them struggle and endure a certain amount of patience in order to learn how to overcome the struggles in order to become stronger. Because those that were considered as the most successful, الرجال لا يربيهم إلا الحزن. Men, you want them to be men? They gotta endure some amount of sorrow, some amount of hardship, some amount. They have to basically continue to get to that point where they're hitting on that milestone. They're challenging themselves. They're facing their own. They're facing, I guess, that limit, and trying to basically get themselves to reach to the limit, and then that limit will continue to basically go farther and farther. لما صبروا وكانوا بآياتنا يوقنون. How did they live لما صبروا? Well, when they were actually living in certainty with the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the ayat. That's basically how they got to al-yaqeen. They got to al-yaqeen, which is certainty, when they actually lived what? إن تطيعوه تهتدوا. How did they get to yaqeen? وَإِن تُطِيعُوهُ تَهْتَدُوا. If you are to live in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you'll find guidance. If you find, in order to find guidance, well, how am I going to find guidance? وأن لو استقاموا على الطريقة لأسقيناهم ماء غدقا لنفتنهم فيه ومن يعرض عن ذكر ربه يسلكه عذابا صعدا. If they were to actually follow and stay on the right path, they would have actually seen the different, basically, they would have drunk abundant water. They would say that things are basically working out for them. But then things might actually appear murky. One, وَمَن يُعْرِضْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ رَبِّهِ. When they're far away and they're basically going away from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is dhikr? Dhikr is in different ways. There's the visual dhikr, taking the moment to take the time to learn the deen. That's the visual dhikr. There's that time to do the oral dhikr, taking the time, reading Quran, repeating, probably dhikr, dua, etc. That's the oral dhikr. There's the behavioral dhikr. This is key because the behavioral dhikr, whether it's what you're listening to, what you're saying, who you're surrounding yourself with, what you're going, what you're walking to, what your brain is constantly busy with, that's going to be the behavioral dhikr. The behavioral dhikr is going to basically affect a person's certainty and is basically going to affect the person's shubuhat. This is key. And then we've got behavioral dhikr, and we also have the audio dhikr. What are you listening to? What are the words? Who are you surrounding yourself with? And that's going to be يَسْلُكْهُ عَذَابًا صَعَدًا. If the person is away from their dhikr, then what they're going to be living in, عَذَابًا صَعَدًا. Is the عَذَابًا صَعَدًا, is it necessarily this intense punishment? Is this only in the akhirah, or is this in the dunya as well? This is in the dunya as well, that they're living a struggle. Where did you get that from? Well, we got that from when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala هَبْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً, give us rahmah, give us the guidance, give us the mercy. And how is mercy going to be coming? Well, it's going to be coming from hidayah. On the other hand, these people that are living away from guidance, they're going to be living the torments. They're going to be living the punishment. They're going to be living in a struggle where they're confusing things and they're just right there living in adhab. So how to help these people? فَمَنِ اتَّبَعَ هُدَايَ فَلَا يَضِلُّ وَلَا يَشْقَى. How to get there? فَمَنِ اتَّبَعَ هُدَايَ. What is اتَّبَعَ? اتَّبَعَ comes from the root تَبِعَ. تَبِعَ basically means to follow. اتَّبَعَ, basically here, the shadda, whether we're speaking about a gradual process, or whether we're speaking about consistency, or whether we're speaking about the commitment itself, it actually comes from the gradual process becoming a consistent thing, and then later on, a repetition. That becomes where, how you become founded on what? On al-huda. On al-huda, on guidance. فَلَا يَضِلُّ. Then that's when you're not going to get into that confusion. Remember, we're speaking about shubuhat. We're trying to break down where does shubuhat come from? How do we get away from shubuhat? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, the psychology of a shubha actually comes from following misguidance. That's why these people, if they were to follow il-huda, guidance, the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's when فَلَا يَضِلُّ وَلَا يَشْقَى. They would not be living in al-dalal. What is al-dalal? Al-dalal is confusing borders. Wait a minute. Isn't that the definition of shubha? There you go. That's the key. Al-dalal is confusing borders. When you're confusing borders, you're confusing your destination. You don't know where you're going. That's a delusion. You think you're doing the right thing. You're thinking that you're living and going through the right thing, but this illusion created the delusion that you're living in. So وَلَا يَشْقَى, because وَلَا يَشْقَى, in other words, they won't suffer. Why won't they suffer? Because remember, when we talked about before that il-hidayah, guidance brings in rahmah. And misguidance يعرض عن ذكر ربه ومن يعرض عن ذكر ربه يسلكه عذابا صعدا. And misguidance and being away from a dhikr, the path, that's basically going to lead the person to nothing but what? عذابا صعدا, into intense punishment, intense suffering. And that's what this word is saying. So that's why it continues with the same idea here. And that's to emphasize. وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا. If a person is to stay away from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is dhikr? Oral dhikr, visual dhikr, behavioral dhikr, audio dhikr, and all of that is going to be considered as dhikr. فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا. Then in that situation, they're going to be living in a difficult life, or in a life where they're trying out so many different things because they're wanting to depend on their own experiences to get them to the right thing, or at least to get them to being successful. So they will try this out, and then it fails. Then they'll try something else out. Then it fails. Then they'll try a third thing out. They'll continue to try so many different things, and then it becomes depressing that I tried out so many things and it didn't work out. And of course, there's so many different delusions, so many different paths out there, but there's only one path to doing the right thing. So what should I do? وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Those that جَاهَدُوا فِينَا, those that had put in an amount of work, an amount of effort, لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. They'd be the ones to be guided to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Lord Almighty is لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. What is لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with those that are basically living al-ihsan, those that are living that level of trying to go up within the ladder from level of Islam, stage of Islam, to the stage of Iman, to the stage of al-ihsan. Muhammad ibn Sirin. How do I get to that? Muhammad ibn Sirin was one of those scholars, and Muhammad ibn Sirin, there's really a lot to say about him, but I don't want to, I guess, get into talking about Muhammad ibn Sirin, but just remember his name, inshallah, we'll talk about him one day. And he said, إِنَّ هَذَا الْعِلْمَ دِينٌ فَانْظُرُوا عَمَّنْ تَأْخُذُونَ دِينَكُمْ. This ilm is in itself a deen. It's that commitment. So therefore, you have to make sure that your vision and how you understand this world, you have to make sure that you are following the right resources. You're using the right resources to make sure that you're not being misguided. Knowledge is a religion. And that's why I started out with that area, to make sure that you don't put in this confusion and fall in this illusion that whether it's the Western culture, whether it's the tribalism, or whether it's any other deviation, that it's what we're going to be using in order to judge Islam. You have to make sure that you are in the right corner and in the right place out of this cage, and that you're looking at things and you're letting your knowledge see with that freedom, that liberation. For knowledge is a religion, and be mindful of whom you take your religion from. What does it mean? Well, you're recognizing that ilm is the basis that you would help yourself in distinguishing those shubuhat, and there's no way that you're going to be capable of distinguishing those shubuhat if you are lost in your ilm. if you're not going through the right resources, then you're going to find yourself confusing your path. Sayyidah Aisha had said that the Prophet ﷺ had said, هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب منه آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب وأخرى متشابهات فأما الذين في قلوبهم زيغ فيتبعون ما تشابه منه ابتغاء الفتنة وابتغاء تأويله وما يعلم تأويله إلا الله والراسخون في العلم يقولون آمنا به كل من عند ربنا وما يذكر إلا أولو الألباب. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, فإذا رأيت الذين يتبعون ما تشابه منه فأولئك الذين سمى الله فاحذروهم. Let's see the translation right there. The Prophet ﷺ recited, it is who has sent down to you the book. In it are verses that are precise. They are the foundations of the book, and others that are ambiguous. As for those in whose hearts is deviation, they will follow what is ambiguous of it, seeking fitna and seeking, well, not its interpretation. We'll talk about it. And no one knows its interpretation except Allah, and those who are firm in knowledge say, we believe in it. All is from our Lord, and no one will be reminded except those of understanding. Then he, peace be upon him, said, if you see those who follow what is ambiguous in it, they are the ones whom Allah had mentioned, so beware of them. What is the point here? The translation isn't quite accurate, to be honest, or at least let's just say it doesn't really give it what it really deserves. Let's see what it says. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed al-Quran, but part of the ayat are muhkamat. What is muhkam? Here, it's not precise. It's basically certain ayat are really absolute, but others, they might have some mutashabihat, they may be comprehensive, they may not necessarily give us all the information, definitely contain some ambiguity. And you'll see the people that there are diseases in their hearts, they'll basically try as much as they can to not hold on to what was already apparent, what was already clear and absolute in the Quran. But you'll see certain people, they just want to go into the areas where it's probably containing multiple interpretations, and then because that's an area that they're capable of, I guess, playing on and wanting to insert certain interpretations to suit their desire. Okay, so al-muhkamat doesn't necessarily mean clear rulings. Some of them, clear rulings is part of al-muhkamat. Clear rulings is part of al-muhkamat. Clear rulings is part of al-muhkamat, but that's not the only thing. Okay, because al-muhkamat can be muhkamat, the words can be muhkama, the rulings can be muhkama, and certainly we're talking about absolute. So we're talking about something that is absolute, doesn't contain, and there's no other way that you can interpret it in. That's al-muhkam, not necessarily clear rulings, because that's part of it. Okay, but you will find some people, they will fall in those shubuhat, or in those, I guess, areas of ambiguity, or areas that might bring in, I would say, and trigger a misconception, because they just want to stick onto those areas where it probably we don't probably have enough information to answer certain questions, but then they'll want to just hold on to those and stick onto those in a way to just create different interpretations, to create misconceptions within the society or even within their life. So that's why we would basically turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we would turn to the different ayat, or even turn those that have the foundations of ilm. There's a difference between classes that would give you ilm and classes that focus on motivation. The classes that are motivational speeches, and those are elementary level. Okay, it could suit some people if they're still at the elementary level, but the classes that are of ilm, those require a certain level of sabr. The classes that teach ilm, those are at a different level because those basically would lead you to this. يقولون آمنا به كل من عند ربنا. It reaches the person to getting to the stage they would continuously say آمنا به, a stage not from Islam, not in the level of Islam, but they're going into a higher level. Amanna. They're going into the level of al-Iman. In the level of al-Islam, it was, let's say, in the early stages, motivational speeches to keep you connected to it. But in the level of Iman, that type of ilm is different. Why? Because they're actually right there. وَمَا يَذَّكَّرُ إِلَّا أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. Their brains had basically been processing to the point, what is ulul albab? Ulul albab actually means the ones that have, let's call it, enlightened core. Lub is the core of something. So ulul albab are the ones that were strong in enhancing their cores. The ones that were strong in enhancing their cores, what core? Whether it's the core of mind, the core of the brain, or whether it's the core of the heart. That's a lub. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, well, if you are seeing those that are basically just confused, why would they be so confused? Well, they would be confused because they weren't actually in the basis of ilm. They were just really just living on, let's call them fast foods, of probably bits and pieces of knowledge here and there, and then they become an easy target to all the different misconceptions, and that's a shubha. That's what I wanted to get to right there. They become an easy target to the different misconceptions. So the Prophet ﷺ said, well, those are the people that you would really want to be careful of. How and what is the area of learning Islam and staying away from shubuhat? The Prophet ﷺ, Ibn Abbas, said, من قرأ القرآن فاتبع ما فيه هداه الله من الضلالة في الدنيا ووقاه يوم القيامة الحساب. Ibn Abbas. Who is Ibn Abbas? Ibn Abbas is Habr al-Quran. When the Prophet ﷺ died, he was approximately 13 years old. And the Prophet ﷺ made the dua for him. Allahumma faqihu fi din wa allimhu at-ta'wil. Ya Allah, give him the knowledge in understanding the deen and the knowledge to interpret it. What did he say? Whoever reads the Quran and follows what is in it, that's the person that is guided from misguidance in this dunya. And on Judgment Day, they would be protected from being held accountable. Now that's why the Prophet ﷺ in the Hadith said, إن هذا القرآن سبب طرفه بيد الله وطرفه بأيديكم فتمسكوا به فإنكم لن تضلوا ولن تهلكوا أبدا بعده أبدا. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that the Quran is a cause. The word cause is sabab, is not necessarily cause. It could also mean, imagine it like a rope. Imagine it, because a sabab can also mean rope. It's like a rope where one side of it is held on to by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The other side is basically held on with your hand. So it's a rope. It's coming down. This rope is basically فَتَمَسَّكُوا بِهِ. This rope that's coming down from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order for you to hold on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that rope is al-Quran. فَإِنَّكُمْ لَن تَضِلُّوا. You would not be misguided and you would not be destroyed or basically corrupted if you were to hold on to it. So the Prophet ﷺ basically warns us, سيكون في آخر أمتي ناس يحدثونكم بما لم تسمعوا أنتم ولا آباؤكم فإياكم وإياهم. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, in the light of all the ayat that we had read, there's going to come a time where amongst the people, amongst who? Amongst the Muslims, there will be people, يحدثونكم, they would speak, and it's going to be an eloquent speech. بما لم تسمعوا, things that you never heard, not you and not your fathers. And so just be careful from these people. How do I know what speech is that? Well, simple. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically telling you that in order to get to the right thing, you would basically need to get to ilm. This is, right now, we're getting close to the final thing. Ibn al-Qayyim. Ibn al-Qayyim said, let's say, this is what, لا تجعل قلبك للإرادات والشبهات مثل السفنجة فتشربها فلا ينضح إلا بها ولكن جعله كالزجاجة المصمتة تمر الشبهات بظاهرها ولا تستقر فيها فيراها بصفائه ويدفعها بصلابته وإلا فإذا أشربت قلبك كل شبهة تمر عليها صار مقرا للشبهات أو كما قال. Let's see what did Ibn al-Qayyim say. Ibn al-Qayyim, in this Muftah Dar al-Sa'ada, it is translated into English, at least the summary of it. You really got to go to it. Let's see. He said, do not make your heart like a sponge for the incoming doubts and misconceptions, soaking them in so that it only exudes those. Instead, make it like a sealed glass bottle. The doubt will pass through its surface and not settle in it. Thus it sees them with clarity and repels them with its firmness. Otherwise, if you let your heart absorb every doubt that it passes by, it will become a dwelling place for doubts. Or, as he had said. Then he said, I do not know of any advice for repelling doubts that I had benefited from as much as this one. Let's look at this one. جماع أمراض القلوب, also Ibn al-Qayyim. جماع أمراض القلب هي أمراض الشبهات والشهوات والقرآن شفاء للنوعين ففيه من البينات والبراهين القطعية ما يبين الحق من الباطل فتزول أمراض الشبه المفسدة للعلم والتصور والإدراك بحيث يرى الأشياء على ما هي عليه. وأما شفاؤه لمرض الشهوات فذلك بما فيه من الحكمة والموعظة الحسنة بالترغيب والترهيب والتزهيد في الدنيا والترغيب في الآخرة. I want you to look at this one. This is key, and this is going to be the final statement, because beautifully Ibn al-Qayyim basically summarized all that we had said. And he said the essence of the disease of the heart are the diseases of doubts and desires, and the Quran is a cure for both types. In it, there are clear signs and decisive proofs that distinguish truth from falsehood, so that the disease of doubt, which corrupt knowledge, perception, and understanding, and removed, enabling one to see things as they truly are. As for its cure for the disease of desires, it is through the wisdom and good admonition it contains, through encouragement and discouragement from the worldly life and encouragement towards the hereafter, along with parables and stories filled with various lessons and insight. When the sound heart perceives it, it becomes inclined towards what it benefits it in both its worldly life and its hereafter, and turns away from what harms it, making the heart love what is righteous and detest what is misguided. This is Ibn al-Qayyim. So inshallah, I'd love to hear what you would like to say. And inshallah, also I could see, can we say that muhkamat means foundation, keeping in mind the purpose of DNAIM? Well, yes, you could actually say that. That's one way of saying things. Certainly, that's a good one. And keeping in mind maqasid al-sharia, definitely. And that's a very good point. Good job, mashallah. I'm very proud of you, Khasa. Let's see. If a woman is stuck in the idea that the Quran is not for her, she can't read it, and Allah is not actually talking to her, she's not worthy enough, she can't not have any kind of a relationship with him. How can she get out of this? Well, in general, if you look at the hadith, if you come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hadith al-Qudsi, if you come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala walking, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come to you running. So it's you putting the effort. never, this is shaitan basically putting you in the delusion, telling you that it's not for you. It's not, you're not that good. That's shaitan using a tactic to make you feel that you're not worthy of going to the Quran. Go to the Quran, and little by little, you'll see that this paranoia and this waswasa that shaitan is basically putting in your brain, that he's basically going to be feeling, but you have to make him feel by not letting his tactic get to you. Okay, that's the secret. So if there are any, I'm gonna mute myself, I guess, or at least I'll let you, if you would like to say anything or unmute yourselves, go ahead, you can unmute yourselves. Got some new sisters coming in right here, mashallah. And so no, you can unmute yourselves. Am I not allowing you to unmute yourselves? Okay, you can unmute.